Just because he insulted death while jumping off a building, death punished him to be reborn in the bodies of 12 people who are about to die, forcing him to experience the most painful deaths in the world. Yee-jae was a capable and talented college student. Before graduation, he stood out among many competitors and successfully secured a final interview with Taikang Group. On the day of the interview, his girlfriend Jisoo also called to encourage him. Yee-jae thought his future was bright, but he never expected a twist of fate to happen right then. While walking on the road, Yee-jae was suddenly bumped into by a man rushing past. Immediately after, he witnessed a terrifying scene. Although the sudden incident frightened Yee-jae, he still stepped forward to help, but the man ultimately lost his life. The stranger's sudden death gave Yee-jae quite a shock, so much so that during the interview he couldn't recover from the horrific image he had just seen. Truly, he failed the interview. Perhaps it was the experience of death that brought misfortune. But from then on, Yee-jae's days were nothing short of miserable. After graduation, he couldn't find a stable job. To pay off his student loans, he worked as a mover, a waiter, and a designated driver. Although the pressure of life was suffocating him, he never gave up on any opportunity to enter Taikang Group, studying hard until midnight every night. 7 years passed in a flash. Yee-jae finally received another interview invitation from Taikang Group. However, on the day of the interview, many interviewers rejected him after seeing his work history over the past few years. Just as Yee-jae wanted to fight for himself, the chief examiner suddenly spoke up in agreement with him. Based on Yee-jae's experiences over these years, he affirmed his abilities. He then had a conversation with Yee-jae. Judging by the smile on his face as he walked out of the room, Yee-jae was certain that he had a high chance of being hired. But the happiness lasted less than 3 seconds before a friend's phone call extinguished his hope. It turned out that not long ago, under the persuasion of another friend, he had invested all the money he had saved over the years with that person. As a result, the guy ran away with money from quite a few people. One can imagine how desperate and angry Yee-jae must have been, but everything was of no avail. He was even taken to the police station for damaging other people's property. After receiving a scolding, Yee-jae wanted to seek comfort from his girlfriend. But unexpectedly, as soon as he arrived at Jisoo's door, he saw a scene. Perhaps because nothing was going right, or perhaps because the gap between him and his girlfriend was widening, Yee-jae stepped forward and broke up with her after the man left. Jisoo wanted to make him stay, but Yee-jae firmly chose to leave. He thought this was miserable enough, but under the pouring rain, as soon as he returned to his place, he found all his belongings thrown out, and the door had a new lock. The landlord left a message stating that he had been behind on rent for too long, and the deposit would not be refunded. While calling the landlord, Yee-jae dragged his computer, refrigerator, and other items under the shed in the rain. Just like that, after a busy night, he sat there motionless like a fool. Just then, a text message suddenly came to his phone. Opening it, he found out that the Taikang Group interview had failed again. All kinds of tragic scenes suddenly flooded his heart. This time, Yee-jae couldn't control it anymore, lying on the ground and starting to cry bitterly. When all hope was shattered, in the end, Yee-jae stood on the rooftop. Looking back at the past, it seemed there was nothing left for him to be nostalgic about.
나에겐 어떠한 희망도 보이지 않는다. 나는 사는 게 두렵지. 죽음 따윈 전혀 두렵지 않다. 죽음은 그저 내 고통을 끝내줄 하찮은 도구일 뿐이니까. 나는 더 이상 살기 위해 발버둥 치지 않을 것이다.
After Yee-jae woke up, he found himself in a strange and luxurious place. Upon careful inspection, he realized this should be a plane. He picked up the tablet in front of him, only to be shocked to see another person's face on the screen. Before he could wonder what was going on, a woman next to him suddenly spoke. These words were exactly the last words Yee-jae said when he died. Every line despised death and showed no fear of death. It was precisely because of this that he angered death and offended the woman in front of him. Now, the female Death wanted to play a special game with Yee-jae. Death took off her glasses, her eyes instantly turned red, and the whole scene changed. When Yee-jae looked again, he found himself on a high platform, but the surroundings were filled with the screams of souls. Just when Yee-jae thought he had come to hell, Death suddenly flashed over and choked him, stating that he would be punished for disrespecting her, and that he would experience the fear brought by various deaths. Saying that, Death threw him down. As the scene shifted, Yee-jae returned to the passenger plane and possessed this man's body. He had just calmed down when Death appeared again, saying that humans only have one chance to experience death in a long life. But now, she would grant Yee-jae 12 death experiences.
넌 앞으로 12번 죽게 된다. 너의 영혼은 곧 죽을 12명의 육체로 들어가게 돼. 그리고 어떤 몸으로 깨어나든 무조건 죽게 된다.
Then Death went on to say that if Yee-jae could stay alive by inhabiting someone else's body, he would be able to take that person's place and live out the rest of their life. Although Death's words were cruel, they also gave Yee-jae a chance to survive. But at this moment, he didn't want to live at all because he had lost everything. Death didn't want to talk nonsense with him and chose to leave directly. Shortly after she left, Yee-jae began to look at the various luxury goods in the cabin. Just then, a strange crystal suddenly floated over. As it quickly drilled into Yee-jae's head, memories that didn't belong to him suddenly flooded his mind. The original owner of this body was named Jin-tae, 33 years old, the second son of the owner of Taikang Group. Since childhood, he had lived a life of luxury, living in a luxurious villa and owning at least 3 private jets. Growing up, he successfully surpassed his brother and was chosen by his father as the successor of Taikang Group. Isn't this a total winner in life? The old Yee-jae wouldn't even dare to dream of this. He never expected to find himself inhabiting the body of a powerful conglomerate heir. Thinking about it, Yee-jae couldn't suppress his excitement. Unexpectedly, before he could experience the rich life, death descended before his eyes. As the plane kept disintegrating, everything in the cabin was blown out, and even a flight attendant was sucked out of the cabin. When the entire plane exploded violently, Yee-jae woke up from the edge of hell again. The feeling of death was so real and painful. After he calmed down, Death next to him suddenly said there were 11 times left. Yee-jae walked over and saw 11 bullets on the table, somewhat confused. Death stated that this was his remaining number of deaths. She would shoot these bullets into Yee-jae's head, letting him possess other people. Yee-jae asked what the crystal that entered his head was. Death explained that it was the memory and ability of the body's original owner. Each possession would transfer different memories and abilities to him through the crystal. After understanding this, Yee-jae asked if his possession changed the original owner's future. Death explained that these people were all about to die, giving their bodies to Yee-jae for a period before death. If he could change their fate against the odds, he could use this body to live again. But upon hearing this, Yee-jae suddenly and loudly questioned Death, asking how he could possibly survive on an exploding plane. Moreover, he didn't want to live from the beginning, so why treat him like this? These words angered Death again. She took Yee-jae to the gates of hell, letting him personally feel the scene of screaming souls. For someone like him, it would only be more miserable in hell after death. Terrified, Yee-jae stated again that even if he luckily survived using someone else's body, wouldn't he still have to come to hell to suffer after living out that life? So what is the use of playing such a game? Unexpectedly, Death stated that if he could luckily survive and live a different life, perhaps he wouldn't need to enter hell at all, because at that time, he might be judged by another death. These words instantly ignited hope in Yee-jae. Just as he decided to try hard to seize this opportunity, Death suddenly said, "This is punishment and also an opportunity," and then rewarded him with a bullet. Once Yee-jae came to his senses, he realized that this time he had possessed the body of a skydiver. But the terrible thing was that he didn't have a parachute on him. Terrified, Yee-jae directly grabbed another person flying next to him. Just then, the crystal-carrying memories drilled into his head at high speed. At this moment, Yee-jae realized that the person he possessed was named Jae Seop, a genuine extreme sports enthusiast who had broken 4 world records. And this time, he was challenging a jump from 8,000 meters without a parachute to land on a designated safety net. If the challenge was successful, he would not only win a prize of 3 billion won, but also attract worldwide attention. Knowing all this, Yee-jae instantly made a decision to change his fate. Fortunately, he obtained Jae Seop's memory and ability through the crystal. Logically speaking, doing it without a parachute shouldn't be a problem. He didn't hesitate to return to his position, adjusted his state, and accelerated directly. This scene completely stunned everyone. When a boy turned his head, he found his classmate revealing a hideous and terrifying face. However, they were not real devils, but delinquent students who often bullied the boy. This caused the boy named Hyuk-soo to feel like he was in hell every day. Under such long-term bullying, Hyuk-soo finally decided to leave a suicide note and end his life. Just then, Yee-jae, who was punished to experience 12 deaths for offending death, finally welcomed his third possession. When Yee-jae woke up, he realized that he seemed to be in a school. Through the mirror, he saw a young face, and he was Hyuk-soo. Yee-jae was puzzled. How could such a young boy die? Suddenly, a burst of laughter interrupted his thoughts. A boy was looking at the tragic scene of Yee-jae's second possession death and laughing loudly. Sensing the other party's disrespect for the dead, Yee-jae walked over directly, preparing to teach him a lesson. Just then, the crystal carrying memories suddenly rushed into his mind. Through the memory crystal, he learned everything about the original owner, Hyuk-soo. It turned out that Hyuk-soo's father passed away when he was 5, and since then, his mother had shouldered all the burdens. To give her son a good environment to grow up in, she worked day and night. Watching his mother work so hard, Hyuk-soo didn't want to tell her about being bullied at school. Finally, under long-term suppression, he ended his flower-like life. After digesting these memories, perhaps feeling a sense of shared fate, Yee-jae felt incredibly regretful for Hyuk-soo's death. But now that things had come to this, he could only hope to use Hyuk-soo's body to change fate and live again. Fortunately, Hyuk-soo died by his own hand, so as long as he didn't do anything foolish, there was a high chance of avoiding death. It turned out that the third possession could change destiny. Thinking about this, Yee-jae unconsciously smiled. Yee-jae didn't want to pay attention to these high school students, but he didn't expect these guys to be so rampant. He wouldn't tolerate such bad habits. Yee-jae picked up a stool and smashed it over. In a few moves, he beat up these delinquent teenagers. Although he had the mental age of a normal adult, the possessed body was still a bit weak. Before he could continue to show his power, a strong boy suddenly grabbed him and threw him away. Yee-jae wanted to counterattack to regain face, but unexpectedly he was subdued and pressed against the locker in one encounter. Subsequently, they dragged him to the basketball hall. The boy named Jin-sung had never suffered such humiliation. He frantically vented the anger in his heart. Just then, Tae-seok suddenly stopped him and persuaded him to stop. Unexpectedly, Jin-sung, who was in extreme anger, beat him up too. It seemed that although Tae-seok could fight, he didn't dare to fight back against Jin-sung. Just as Jin-sung was preparing to continue attacking Yee-jae, a girl suddenly walked in and called out to him. Instantly, Jin-sung changed his face. Returning home, Hyuk-soo's mother's care made Yee-jae unconsciously think of his own mother. He seemed to have forgotten to think about how sad his mother would be when he jumped off the building regardless of everything. And he would never know that the moment he jumped, his mother had called him. But no matter what, since he chose to live again, Yee-jae had to cherish his current life. The only trouble now was the gang of delinquents in the class. Since force couldn't solve it, it was better to choose intellect. Based on long-term observation, he quickly determined that there was also a great conflict between Tae-seok and Jin-sung. But Tae-seok was clearly very strong, so why did he not dare to resist Jin-sung? Holding this question, he followed Tae-seok into the bathroom when he was alone and asked his doubts. Unexpectedly, Tae-seok didn't want to pay attention to him at all. Yee-jae knew that Tae-seok wouldn't actively bully others, so he kept trying to get information from him, expressing that he wanted to unite with him to deal with Jin-sung. As a result, Tae-seok suddenly stated that he didn't take Jin-sung seriously at all. It was just that there was a super capable senior backing Jin-sung, and basically everyone in this area had been taught a lesson by him. It was also because he couldn't defeat the other guy that he didn't dare to resist Jin-sung. When Tae-seok was leaving, Yee-jae said that as long as he didn't intervene, he had a way to handle all this. That day, Yee-jae was eating in the cafeteria as usual when Jin-sung came over to cause trouble again, pressing Yee-jae's head directly into the bowl, as if to show off his status. Unexpectedly, Yee-jae didn't tolerate him at all, directly dumping the whole bowl of noodles on Jin-sung's head, then turning and leaving gracefully. The angry Jin-sung ordered Tae-seok to bring Yee-jae back. However, Tae-seok refused Jin-sung with the excuse of eating. Jin-sung, who was soaked and made a fool of in front of his goddess, ran out of the cafeteria in extreme embarrassment. Afterward, filled with resentment, he went to find his senior, Seong-hyop, hoping he would help him vent his anger. So that afternoon, Seong-hyop brought a group of people aggressively to Yee-jae's class. Unexpectedly, when Seong-hyop saw Yee-jae, he was speechless. It turned out that Seong-hyop disdained bullying someone so insignificant, and he looked down even more on the fact that his subordinate had been bullied by such a nobody, so he directly took his men and left, warning Jin-sung not to follow him again. The following things were easy to handle. Without Seong-hyop's support, Jin-sung's status instantly reversed. Just like that, Jin-sung became the new loser. At night, Yee-jae, who finished his night run, felt that he had finally welcomed a new life, but unexpectedly, the next moment, it turned out to be a false alarm. It seemed death's punishment was just so-so. But to his surprise, when Yee-jae woke up, he returned to the edge of hell once again. He didn't expect to be beaten to death by that madman Jin-sung. It seemed he still underestimated human nature. However, Yee-jae blamed all this on death. He believed that he had avoided death, and it was death who secretly manipulated things to put him to death. Unexpectedly, these words angered death again. Death told him she wouldn't do anything because there was absolutely no need. If Yee-jae dared to question her again, she would shatter him. Then, regardless of whether Yee-jae was ready, she directly started the fourth round of death experience. And this time, when he woke up, he found his head covered, and even his hands and feet were tied tight. Before Yee-jae could continue questioning, several men in black stepped forward to hold him down and began to use water torture. As half a bucket of water was poured continuously, seeing that he was about to suffocate, everyone stopped and then they pulled off the hood. Yee-jae was confused. He didn't know where this was or why he was tied up, until the man sitting opposite suddenly asked,
그년이랑 돈 어딨어?
Yee-jae looked completely bewildered. He had no clue about any woman or money, simply because he wasn't the owner of this body at all. Seeing that he didn't answer, the men in black thought he was playing dumb, so they prepared to use lynching directly. The leader among them picked up a hammer and walked over. At the moment the hammer was about to fall, time suddenly stopped. The crystal carrying the original owner's memory and ability flew over and then drilled directly into Yee-jae's mind. In an instant, a flood of memories that didn't belong to him emerged. The original owner of this body was named Ju-hun, 35 years old, a killer who had been in the underworld for many years. Cold and ruthless, he had always been highly regarded by his boss. But he fell in love with his boss's woman, Yee-jae. And Yee-jae was also a pitiful person who was frequently abused. Unable to bear seeing her continue to suffer, Ju-hun decided to run away with Yee-jae. So he first stole 10 billion won of the boss's secret funds and hid it in a concealed place. Then he agreed on a meeting place with Yee-jae. Unexpectedly, halfway to the meeting, he was intercepted by people sent by the boss and tied up here. After possessing Ju-hun's memory and ability, Yee-jae's combat power instantly exploded. He kicked the opponent away and prepared to fight back. With Ju-hun's rich fighting experience and judgment, even if his body was tied, the minions in front of him were no problem at all. It didn't take long for Yee-jae to knock all these people to the ground. Looking at his face in the reflection of the glass, he couldn't help but sigh that this person's life was really like a movie. Although exciting with his current identity, he might be killed by people sent by the boss at any time. Thinking of this, Yee-jae suddenly felt a bit of a breakdown. Could it be that this rebirth would also be abandoned halfway? Just then, he suddenly thought of the 10 billion won Ju-hun hid. If he had this money, he could completely leave here and start a new life. Maybe he could get rid of the 12 deaths death set for him. Thinking of this, Yee-jae's confidence multiplied. So he opened the rolling door in front of him, preparing to leave. Unexpectedly, what came into his view was a busy city highway. It turned out he was on a truck. In his first life as an ordinary person oppressed by life, Yee-jae had never experienced such an exciting life. This was simply a scene that would only appear in movies. He sighed at Ju-hun's life while admiring his skills. The people waking up on the truck saw Ju-hun ran away and hurriedly informed the boss of the situation. Knowing the news, the boss quickly issued an order. He wanted to offer a reward of 2 billion won to capture Ju-hun. This time, not only gangs and various killers, but even the police participated in the pursuit of Ju-hun. Under the layers of surveillance lock, everyone quickly caught up with Yee-jae, and both sides launched a fierce chase on the cross-sea bridge. One killer seized the opportunity and shot out the tire of the vehicle in front of Yee-jae. Just as the killers were attacking frantically, the large truck from before also rushed over from the other side, preparing to completely block Yee-jae's path. Unexpectedly, because the amplitude was too large, the large truck tipped over directly. Seeing the bad situation, Yee-jae quickly braked, and other vehicles that couldn't avoid it crashed into it one after another. Just like that, accompanied by this explosion, Yee-jae successfully got rid of the pursuit and came to the meeting place of Ju-hun and Yee-jae. From the memory, Ju-hun seemed to have really fallen in love with this woman. So after Yee-jae occupied Ju-hun's body, he didn't want Ju-hun to have regrets, preparing to get the money, give some to Yee-jae, and then part ways. Yee-jae asked him pitifully where he hid the money. Yee-jae walked not far away and told Yee-jae that he put all that 10 billion won on the boat with lights on the opposite side. Who knew that just after he finished saying this, Yee-jae suddenly took out a weapon. Yee-jae returned to the edge of hell again. He collapsed and asked Death why that woman wanted to kill him. Unexpectedly, Death laughed out loud after hearing it. Then she mocked Yee-jae for being too naive. That woman was clearly for the money, yet he actually thought there was any affection between Joo-hun and her. Saying that, she belittled Yee-jae's simple mind again. But what Death didn't know was that Yee-jae did this on purpose. Seeing Yee-jae actually revealing a sly smile, Death immediately rewarded him with a shot, so Yee-jae's fifth rebirth began. This time when he woke up, he found that he had actually come to a prison. Before the memory crystal arrived, he decided to familiarize himself with the situation here first. However, what he never expected was that he actually saw Jin-song here, the one who killed him when he possessed Hyoksu. Since that incident, Jin-song seemed to have changed into a different person, and now he was a perverted killer that everyone in the prison talked about with fear. Although everyone else was too afraid to provoke Jin-song, Yee-jae wasn't about to put up with him. He stepped right up and knocked Jin-song to the ground with a single punch. If it weren't for this guy, he might have been able to spend his life peacefully after the third possession. Seeing Yee-jae make a move, the inmates stepped forward to stop him, persuading him not to be impulsive. Just then, the memory crystal suddenly flooded into his mind. The owner of this body was named Tae-song, now 21 years old, who dreamed of becoming a fighter since childhood, but was forced to give up due to poverty. That day, seeing his mother being threatened because she couldn't repay the loan, he was preparing to step forward to help when a phone call suddenly came. Someone offered 200 million won for him to take the blame for a hit-and-run big boss, because Tae-sang was not yet 18 at this time. The lawyer told him he should be released soon. So Tae-sang, who was seriously short of money, didn't hesitate and agreed directly. He went to the police station and took responsibility for all the crimes. Unexpectedly, the person hit died unfortunately during the court session. Even though Tae-sang was under 18, he was still sentenced to 2 years in prison. Subsequently, in prison, he proposed a condition to attorney Kim, who was in charge of the case, demanding to raise the payment to 1 billion won. Otherwise, once he was released, he would find another lawyer and go to the police station to overturn the case. Tae-sang's threat didn't scare attorney Kim. Instead, attorney Kim warned Tae-sang that this lion's open-mouth behavior would only lead to a bad end. Because Tae-sang had practiced boxing for a while before, basically no one in prison dared to trouble him, and he even took on a subordinate named Ji-young. Until this day, Jin-song entered the prison for harming his classmate Hyoksu. He seemed to have become more and more perverted after killing people. He threatened that whoever provoked him, he would make them never leave here. Unexpectedly, just after Jin-sang finished his harsh words, Tae-sang stepped forward and beat him up. The grudge between the two was thus settled. Yee-jae, who received these memories, finally understood why the inmates just now persuaded him not to be impulsive. It turned out that Tae-sang was due to be released in 4 days, so recently he was unwilling to provoke Jin-song. Since that was the case, Yee-jae didn't want to affect the release after serving the sentence in 4 days, so he wasn't prepared to pay attention to this pervert anymore. After all, this guy had already been severely punished by the law. After 2 years of abuse and humiliation, Jin-song was preparing to strike with deadly intent before Tae-sang was released from prison. But his plan hadn't been implemented yet when it was discovered in advance by the always vigilant Yee-jae. Yee-jae originally wanted to cripple Jin-song outright, but thinking that he was about to be released from prison, he instead asked Jin-song whether he still remembered Hyoksu and Tae-seok. Hearing this, Jin-song asked in shock how he knew. So Yee-jae lied, claiming that he could see ghosts, saying that every day he saw the tragically killed Hyoksu following closely behind Jin-song. Jin-song didn't believe it at all. After Yee-jae described in detail what happened back then, Jin-song finally believed his words. This day was the day Tae-song, that is, the person Yee-jae possessed, was released from prison. Before leaving, he threw a box of strawberry milk to Jin-song. This completely drove Jin-song crazy. In a way, Yee-jae could be said to have punished Jin-song on Hyoksu's behalf. After being released from prison, he went directly to the lighthouse where Joo-hun was shot. That 10 billion won was the key point for him to restart his life. He wouldn't be stupid enough to really give the money to that woman. Yee-jae first took a boat to that small island, then followed his memory to the place where the money was buried. As he dug, soon cash and diamonds were successfully dug out. Seeing so much money, Yee-jae revealed an extremely excited smile, but the problem also appeared. Getting suddenly rich just after getting out of prison would easily arouse suspicion. So after thinking about it, he decided not to move this money for the time being. However, to help the mother of this body's owner, Tae-sang, he decided to take a sum of money to solve that loan for her. Unexpectedly, as soon as he returned to Tae-sang's doorstep, a man suddenly stabbed him with a knife. This person was exactly the father of the victim of the hit and run that Tae-sang took the blame for initially, coming here to avenge his dead daughter. Unexpectedly, Yee-jae became the unlucky one. Just as the man was about to strike again, Yee-jae apologized on Tae-sang's behalf and revealed the whole truth. These words directly stunned the man in front of him. Hearing footsteps coming, he hurriedly fled the scene. And just after he ran, Ji-young, who was released from prison with Yee-jae, ran over.
아, 놀랐잖아요. 다른 새끼한테 죽는 줄 알고.
Yee-jae didn't find any conflict between Tae-sang and Ji-young in his memory, so he was confused why Ji-young wanted to deal with him. Ji-young didn't talk nonsense, directly stabbing the knife into Yee-jae's abdomen. While stabbing, he said as long as he killed Tae-sang, he could get 100 million won. Only then did Yee-jae remember the matter of Tae-sang threatening Attorney Kim. It seemed all this was planned by Attorney Kim. Unexpectedly, he still couldn't escape this dead end. With Tae-sang's death, Yee-jae woke up from the edge of hell again. Fortunately, that 10 billion won was still in his control. This time he didn't talk nonsense, begging Death to let him enter the next life quickly, and Death granted his wish. With a burst of gunfire, Yee-jae opened his eyes. Unfortunately, for the 6th time, he actually possessed a baby. Devastated, he began wailing uncontrollably, but fortunately, his mother saw this, hurriedly picked him up, and comforted him softly. Looking at the woman's gentle appearance, this must be an incredibly warm family. Unexpectedly, after leaving the public eye, the woman instantly changed her face. Such an irritable woman made the possessing Yee-jae instantly dumbfounded. Little did he know that what happened next would let Yee-jae know what true cruelty meant. As soon as the woman returned home, she threw the baby on the sofa casually, then asked her husband to get him something to eat. The man walked over with a face full of smiles. He thought this should be a kind father, but unexpectedly the next moment, the father began to feed him a box of expired food. Yee-jae decided to resist to the end, but unexpectedly, his hunger strike made the man in front of him completely mad. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the doorbell suddenly rang. Seeing that it seemed the police had come, the father hurriedly wiped off the expired food on the baby's mouth. The woman also used an air freshener to remove the smell of smoke. After opening the door, the police stated that someone reported child abuse here, so now they brought a child protection expert to check the child's condition. After speaking, they walked in and began to check the baby's body. Just then, the baby's father hurriedly stood up to express that all this might be a misunderstanding. He took out a certificate of employment from a child welfare institution and handed it to them. If there was a problem, he couldn't possibly be competent for this job. Looking at the certificate and then at the photo of a happy family on the table, the police and the expert felt they might really have misunderstood and then prepared to leave. Just then, the powerless Yee-jae could only keep them by crying. But this behavior was only considered as him being hungry. As they left, Yee-jae instantly stopped crying because he found this couple seemed a bit wrong. The crazy woman lifted him directly over her head and then threw him down without hesitation. As Yee-jae slowly opened his eyes, he still hadn't walked out of the collapsing emotion just now. From birth to death took only a short time. Even that child didn't have any memory ability and just died prematurely like this. Yee-jae asked angrily why there are such vicious parents in the world and why death doesn't punish such people. Death coldly stated that they don't interfere with the life and death of normal people, only waiting for them to die to judge their souls. After saying that, she fired another shot at Yee-jae. With his 7th reincarnation through possession, Yee-jae appeared on a strange, unfamiliar street. To find the cash and diamonds hidden in the cabinet in the life before last, he rushed forward according to the street signs regardless of danger, and finally luckily ran to the mall to retrieve this money. Holding the money, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Also at this time, he discovered that the body he possessed was quite handsome. While Yee-jae was being narcissistic, the memory crystal arrived here. As it quickly rushed into his mind, Yee-jae obtained all the memories and abilities of the body's original owner. His name was Jae-on-yu, 24 years old, who had attracted much attention since childhood because of his superior appearance, and was now a professional model. After possessing Jae-on-yu's memory, Yee-jae went directly to Jae-on-yu's mansion. Since everything now belonged to him, he might as well enjoy this life of financial freedom properly. So that night he went to a bar and indulged all night, until the next day he was suddenly woken up by a man. Looking at the other person's appearance, Yee-jae searched his memory for a long time before realizing that this person seemed to be Jae-on-yu's brother, here to remind him not to forget the promise he had made. It turned out that Jae-on-yu's brother needed to go abroad for a business trip for a week and asked his younger brother to help him look after the coffee shop for a week, and today was the day to go to the shop to help. Having no choice, the possessing Yee-jae could only come to the coffee shop. Just as he was thinking about whether to take the money and run, unexpectedly, when a woman walked gracefully into the shop, Yee-jae was completely dumbfounded, because the person coming was exactly his ex-girlfriend, Jisoo. Looking at this incredibly familiar face, scenes from the past gradually emerged in his mind. As Jisoo walked closer, Yee-jae remembered the last parting before he jumped off the building. At that time, he was at the lowest point of his life. Seeing another man send Jisoo flowers and take her home, Yee-jae, feeling that the distance between him and his girlfriend was getting further and further, finally chose to let go. Now Jisoo's sudden appearance disrupted Yee-jae's idea of running away. Although they met again, Yee-jae dared not step forward to speak. When Jisoo ordered a cup of citron tea and sat quietly in the corner, Yee-jae learned that she was now a novelist. So he hurriedly checked Jisoo's current situation online, only to find that on the day before he jumped off the building, Jisoo's novel won a grand prize. Despite this, Yee-jae, who had already broken up, chose not to disturb Jisoo. After all, he was now just a possessed rebirth. Utilizing his free time, he found the books published by Jisoo. After browsing, he found that many plotlines inside were actually the experiences of their meeting and getting to know each other. After reading the book, Yee-jae suddenly appeared incredibly melancholy, and all kinds of memories emerged in his mind again. Just then, a girl's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. For a moment, he thought Jisoo already had a child, until he heard her say brother and sister-in-law. And after getting a look at the man's face, Yee-jae realized it was the same man who had once taken Jisoo home. It turned out everything was a misunderstanding. At that time, because Jisoo's novel won an award, her brother specially sent flowers to congratulate her. So much so that after Yee-jae saw it, he mistakenly thought Jisoo had a new love, so he said some cruel breakup words. His decisive departure must have made Jisoo very sad. Wondering if it was to make amends, the next day, Yee-jae began to actively talk to Jisoo. Knowing that Jisoo came here every day to write novels, Yee-jae used this opportunity to pose as her fan, presented many desserts, and successfully chatted with Jisoo about the stories in the novel. Wondering if she saw her boyfriend's shadow in the conversation with the man in front of her, Jisoo was also full of curiosity about this man who suddenly struck up a conversation. For a period afterward, they chatted often, and their relationship gradually grew much closer. But Jisoo always kept a certain distance because she knew that no matter how similar, the man in front of her was not the dead Yee-jae. That night, shortly after Jisoo left, a customer suddenly stated she just saw a tragic car accident, and the person hit seemed to be the girl who frequented this shop. Hearing this, Yee-jae instantly thought of Jisoo, then ran frantically towards the accident scene. He suspected death was playing tricks behind his back again. After arriving at the tragic scene, ignoring the police's obstruction, Yee-jae insisted on seeing the girl who was killed. Amidst the struggle, he suddenly saw Jisoo standing unharmed not far away. It turned out to be a false alarm. Afterward, Jisoo found Yee-jae and spoke to him. Wondering if she saw herself in his anxious look, Jisoo talked about what happened to her. At that time, after Yee-jae took his own life, the distracted Jisoo went to the hospital. She didn't expect her boyfriend to choose to jump off a building just after breaking up. That was the saddest time in her life. After recounting these, she left. Through contact during this time, Yee-jae understood that Jisoo hadn't forgotten him at all. But seeing her immersed in pain every day, Yee-jae suddenly made a decision. On this night, he found an opportunity to tell Jisoo that the story of death and rebirth he told before was actually not fictional, but a real event he was currently experiencing. He didn't intend to say it originally, but he didn't want to see Jisoo sad all day, so he decided to reveal his true identity as Yee-jae. When a man stepped out of the car, Yee-jae never expected to see someone who had appeared in all 7 of his rebirths. This time, Yee-jae is about to face his 8th rebirth. When he woke up, he found a delicate face appeared in the mirror. Although he didn't know who this person was, he would know everything when the memory crystal arrived. However, while he took advantage of this interval to explore the body owner's room, he was horrified to find that this person's home was not only filled with various bloody paintings, but also had various torture instruments on the wall. What was more terrifying was that the red blood splattered everywhere clearly indicated that the owner of this body was not ordinary at all. Just as Yee-jae was shocked by the scene in front of him, the memory crystal suddenly flew up from the bucket full of blood and then drilled into his mind at extreme speed. Immediately after, the memory of the body owner was opened. His name was Yee-jae, 34 years old. Because he had extreme artistic talent since childhood, he grew up to become a painter. But the works he painted were never recognized. Until one day, as he was walking down the street, a sudden sound of someone falling behind him startled him. Seeing this scene, Yee-jae was not afraid but walked forward instead. When he touched the red blood, he seemed to open a new world. So for a period afterward, he began to be addicted to paintings that stimulated the senses. Once he couldn't find inspiration, he began to actively look for prey and then cruelly murdered the other party to obtain creative inspiration. Just like that, a perverted serial killer and a famous painter were formed. Yee-jae, who obtained these memories, was scared, paralyzed on the ground directly. The body owner Yee-jae was really too cruel and perverted. He couldn't accept it at all. And just after Yee-jae calmed down his mood, a puppet on the table reminded him of the scene that happened in the 7th life. The man named Tae-woo hit and killed his Jisoo. No matter what, he wanted revenge. Tae-woo, the eldest son of Taekang Group. The second son was Jin-tae, who died on the plane, who was also the first person Yee-jae possessed and reborn as. Originally, the heir of Taekang Group was designated to Jin-tae. However, to take all this away, Tae-woo secretly planned the conspiracy to put Jin-tae to death. In Yee-jae's several possessed rebirths and deaths, there were almost always shadows of Tae-woo. One can imagine that Tae-woo was definitely not a good person. However, Tae-woo looked harmless in the company, polite to everyone. That day, a psychological expert came to the company. During the lecture, he talked about people with psychopathic psychology. Such people would lack care and empathy for others at work. The psychological expert jokingly stated that as long as such people didn't have the urge to kill, they were often easy to succeed. Saying that, he wanted to find someone on the spot to test to see if there were people with this psychopathic psychology in Taekang Group. As the only young master of the company currently, the psychological expert asked Tae-woo if he wanted to try. With the applause around him continuously ringing, Tae-woo had to accept this test. After showing 4 photos, the psychological expert asked directly,
대표님, 사진 속에 웃는 얼굴은 몇 개인가요?
3개입니다.
좀 힘들게 맞추신 것 같은데 바로 다음 사진으로 가보죠. 이 중에서 다른 사진은 몇 번일까요?
3번이죠.
여러분, 박태우 대표님은 안타깝게도 사페가 아니시네요. 아쉽습니다.
On the other side, Yee-jae, possessing the perverted killer, also came downstairs to Taekang Group. Just as he prepared to rush in to find Tae-woo for revenge, suddenly a stream of blood gushed out of his nose, and immediately after, he fainted directly. When he woke up again, he had arrived at the hospital. From the doctor, he learned that this body had late-stage brain cancer, and the survival period was 1 month. Knowing this, Yee-jae left the hospital without saying a word. 1 month was enough for him to take revenge. Just then, a phone call suddenly came. What Yee-jae never expected was that the young master of Taekang Group, Tae-woo, asked to see him by name. When Yee-jae arrived at the agreed location, he realized that Tae-woo had taken a fancy to the creation of this body's owner, which was the abstract painting named Red Cloud in front of him. Yee-jae remembered that Yee-jae created this painting only after murdering 5 people in a row. Sure enough, like attracts like. This Tae-woo was definitely a pervert too. Just as Yee-jae took advantage of the few people around to prepare to strike, he suddenly thought of Death's words.
네가 누군가를 죽이려고 한다면 그땐 내가 개입하게 될 거야.
Even so, Yee-jae still prepared to act, but was suddenly interrupted by Tae-woo's secretary. It seemed Tae-woo's father had an urgent matter with him. Seeing Tae-woo about to leave, Yee-jae hurriedly said he was willing to sell this work that wasn't for sale to him, wondering if he wanted it. After getting Tae-woo's affirmation, Yee-jae asked for his address and stated he would deliver it personally. Shortly after, Tae-woo suddenly received a call from the secretary beside his father. The woman stated that the speech in the morning was actually done deliberately by Chairman Park, the purpose being to test if he was really mentally ill. It seemed Jin-tae's death had already made his father suspicious. Knowing this, Tae-woo instantly became a bit agitated. He absolutely couldn't let his father know that he murdered his brother. Fortunately, he did that thing flawlessly, leaving no trace to check. To relieve his anxious mood, Tae-woo still took some illegal substances to stimulate his brain. Then he began to race cars in the city. Perhaps Yee-jae's 7th rebirth was killed by being hit because Tae-woo took substances and raced. Not knowing how long passed when Tae-woo returned home, he didn't expect Yee-jae had been waiting here for a long time. Seeing his empty hands, Tae-woo was a bit puzzled about what he meant. Yee-jae didn't waste any words. He stepped on Tae-woo's car, trying to provoke him. Sure enough, after a few times, the furious Tae-woo swung his fist at him. After a simple struggle between the two sides, Tae-woo was successfully subdued by Yee-jae. And this time he decided to use the advantage of the body owner, Yee-jae, to deal with Tae-woo. He brought Tae-woo back to the secret base, preparing to let this guy taste the feeling of being sliced. Looking at everything around, Tae-woo seemed a bit terrified. Unexpectedly, just then, Yee-jae, who was preparing tools, suddenly fell to the ground. When he woke up, he found his hands and feet had been tied, and Tae-woo in the distance had turned into the hunter. He was very satisfied with this playground. Since Yee-jae had provided him with this place, he would certainly enjoy it to the fullest. Then he picked up the chainsaw beside him. When Yee-jae woke up, he returned to the edge of hell again. The incredibly piercing pain just now seemed to still haunt him. Death mocked and asked him how the taste was. Unexpectedly, Yee-jae, who was screaming just now, suddenly laughed crazily. Looking at his appearance, Death suddenly spoke.
일부러 죽임을 당한 거였어?
Just as Tae-woo cruelly killed Yee-jae, what Tae-woo didn't know was that all this was recorded by the surveillance next door. Yee-jae understood that death wouldn't allow him to actively harm people. Since that was the case, he sacrificed this body to achieve his goal. Anyway, Gyu-cheol was a perverted killer himself, so he wouldn't have a guilty conscience. Fortunately, in the end, all this was proceeding according to his plan. As long as he obtained the evidence of Tae-woo killing people, he had a way to make Tae-woo pay a tragic price within the rules set by death. As death shot a bullet into Yee-jae's head, the 9th possession rebirth officially began. This time he possessed a middle-aged man. As the memory crystal quickly flooded into his mind, the identity of the body owner also surfaced. His name was Ji-hyung, 42 years old this year, a proper useless policeman. Because of his timid and cowardly character, he was often ostracized and looked down upon by colleagues. So even after working for many years, he never had any chance for promotion or salary increase. Of course, all this was also related to his mother. On her deathbed, his mother urged Ji-hyung to put his own safety first, no matter what happened. His father was a policeman who died in the line of duty, and his mother didn't want him to follow in his father's footsteps one day. Ji-hyung promised his mother, so there was the current useless policeman. Knowing all this, Yee-jae felt somewhat emotional about this person's fate. However, he was very satisfied with the identity of a policeman because it would make the implementation of his revenge plan smoother. Just as Yee-jae was thinking about the next action, a sound of fighting suddenly came from the opposite side. He looked carefully and found it was actually an old acquaintance. That person was Ji-young, the very one who had killed him when he was inhabiting Taesong during his 5th reincarnation. Since the opportunity was right in front of him, Yee-jae didn't plan to let this guy go, so he walked over without hesitation and said hello. Ji-young didn't understand where this idiot came from to meddle in others' business. Yee-jae spoke directly.
네가 한때 형님으로 모시던 조태상.
뭐? 어디서 개소리를 하고 있어. 조태상 그 새끼는 나한테 깔방 맞고 죽었어.
Seeing that his admission of crime in public was recorded, Ji-young instantly exploded. He stabbed angrily towards Yee-jae. However, Yee-jae, possessing 8 lifetimes of memory, was not the useless policeman from before. After subduing Ji-young with a set of smooth moves, he handed Ji-young over to the police who arrived. This scene was filmed by people on the scene, and it didn't take long to top the hot search online. Seeing this, colleagues in the police station revealed incredible expressions. They didn't expect the once useless guy to leap into a hero, which was somewhat unbelievable. After this brief incident, Yee-jae set off straight for Gyu-cheol's home with Ji-hyung's partner, Ji-hun. He wanted to get those evidences of Tae-woo killing people first. Meanwhile, the psychopathic Tae-woo was still reminiscing about the excitement of slicing human bodies. Just then, the secretary suddenly walked over and interrupted him. Looking at this somewhat weak woman in front of him, the evil in Tae-woo's heart surged again. He warmly invited the other party to go to a romantic place for dinner with him. The woman never expected to receive the boss's favor, so she agreed without hesitation. At this time, Yee-jae and Ji-hun had arrived at Gyu-cheol's home. Because Gyu-cheol recorded his crimes every single time, Yee-jae used these very devices to carry out his plan. He was certain these scenes must have been recorded. Ji-hun ran out directly to call for backup after seeing the scenes of Gyu-cheol killing people. Taking advantage of this interval, Yee-jae copied all of Tae-woo's videos and then unhesitatingly deleted the original files in the computer. Because of Tae-woo's identity and his powerful network, Yee-jae didn't believe a group of police dared to fight against him. So even with these evidences, he had to plan for the long term. Anyway, with Yee-jae's help, the police directly blocked Gyu-cheol's home, and Gyu-cheol, this perverted serial killer, finally fell into the net. Just as Yee-jae was preparing for the next move, unexpectedly, Tae-woo suddenly delivered himself to the door with his secretary. Since the experience last time, Tae-woo regarded Gyu-cheol's home as a club. Coming here with the female secretary this time was to satisfy his morbid psychology of killing again. Yee-jae understood in his heart. So after revealing his identity, he registered their names directly, hoping Tae-woo would protect the girl beside him properly. Because of solving Gyu-cheol's serial murder case, Ji-hyung, possessed by Yee-jae, topped the hot search again. While Ji-hyung became famous, it also aroused Tae-woo's killing intent. He directly found the gang organization he had cooperated with before, asking them to eliminate Ji-hyung no matter what. Yee-jae on the other side didn't sit still waiting for death. He gave the evidence of Tae-woo's crime to a reporter, who guaranteed to make an exclusive report. Unexpectedly, just as Yee-jae prepared to carry out the next step of the plan, the gang's killer suddenly came to the door. Shortly after, Tae-woo suddenly received a phone call. This person was a certain leader of the TV station. He claimed that a policeman named Ji-hyung provided a video containing all the evidence of Tae-woo killing people. The TV station leader stated he would try his best to suppress it, but couldn't guarantee no other problems would arise. After hanging up the phone, Tae-woo dialed the gang organization's number again. He wanted to know if that Ji-hyung had been eliminated. Unexpectedly, the one answering the phone was exactly Ji-hyung. It turned out that the knife stabbed by the killer before was caught by Yee-jae, who then instantly completed a counter-kill. Now the head of the gang organization had been taken to the police station. Yee-jae stated on the phone that he not only grasped the evidence of Tae-woo's crime, but now also had proof of him hiring a killer. This time, no matter what, he would make Tae-woo ruined and receive the punishment he deserved. These words simply enraged Tae-woo. He felt as if he had no grudge against this policeman. So why did the other party hold on to him like this? Could it be for money? Thinking of this, Tae-woo invited Ji-hyung to his office shortly after. He decided to buy the other party off with a huge sum of money. Unexpectedly, what he got was a burst of mockery. Because Tae-woo didn't know Yee-jae's true identity, his wish was impossible to realize. After fiercely humiliating Tae-woo, Yee-jae left directly. He wanted to sit and wait for the media and the masses to know Tae-woo's true face. But something he didn't expect happened. Tae-woo actually surrendered to the police publicly, admitting the fact of killing Yee-jae. In an instant, reporters surrounded the outside of the police station. Tae-woo stated that he indeed killed Yee-jae, the serial killer, because he was also a victim. At that time, after he was taken to the house by Yee-jae, he also thought he might not survive, so he was forced to fight back. After killing Yee-jae, he worried about affecting Taekong Group's reputation, so he concealed it and didn't report it. Subsequently, the TV station played the video, but the content inside only had the scene of Yee-jae grabbing Tae-woo into the crime scene. The subsequent content was all deleted. But the media and the masses didn't know it all. In an instant, public opinion began to ferment. Everyone thought Tae-woo was for self-protection and also helped people get rid of a serial killer. So they petitioned the government one after another, asking to release Tae-woo. And at this time, Tae-woo's network also began to show power. From high government officials down to police station leaders, all stood on Tae-woo's side. Before long, Tae-woo was released innocent amidst a burst of cheers. Shortly after, on the plane to the United States, Tae-woo received a phone call. It was from the policeman he bribed. He had already tied up Ji-hyung and wanted to ask how Tae-woo wanted to deal with him. Tae-woo said not to kill him first, waiting for him to return from the United States to do it personally. As Tae-woo lay on the bed and fell asleep, unknowingly, a violent alarm suddenly woke him up. Confused, just as he came outside, he saw the TV screen broadcasting all the evidence of his killings. The angry Tae-woo came to the cockpit, only to find it empty. Meanwhile, after broadcasting those criminal evidences, the TV began to warn Tae-woo that the plane would explode in 30 seconds. If he didn't want to die, put on the parachute next to him. As the countdown began, the plane's engine suddenly exploded. Terrified, Tae-woo could only grab the parachute and jump out at the last moment of the explosion. After rolling in the air, he successfully opened the parachute and then landed somewhat awkwardly on a highway. Unexpectedly, just as he stood up, a speeding car knocked him flying directly. When the person who got out of the car walked up to him, Tae-woo was horrified to discover he was exactly Ji-hyung. But wasn't he kidnapped by the policeman he bribed? What on earth was going on? Let's turn back time to a while ago. Yee-jae, possessing the memories of 8 lifetimes, understood that a simple video was nowhere near enough to bring Tae-woo to justice, so he decided to make full use of the memories from his previous 8 lives. First was the 4th life, Ju-hun. When in the gang organization, he knew that all the illegal dealings between the boss and Tae-woo were secretly hidden by the boss as leverage. So after arresting the gang boss, he secretly took these materials. And Jin-tae from the 1st life knew that Tae-woo had a habit of taking medication, so utilizing this, he secretly swapped them for sleeping pills. As Tae-woo boarded the plane, Ji-hyung had Ji-hun and the captain set up a trap for him. They coerced the bribed policeman to lie to dispel Tae-woo's worries. And Yee-jae wasn't tied up at all because he was using the 2nd life's Jae-seop's skills to hide in the plane's cockpit and hack the entire plane. At this time, Tae-woo was also sleeping soundly because of the sleeping pills. Taking advantage of this interval, all of Tae-woo's criminal evidence was broadcast by the TV station. In the video, Tae-woo personally explained who he wanted to eliminate and who he bribed, so the corresponding high-level leaders were also dug out. In an instant, the whole country was in an uproar. Yee-jae jumped down in advance after handling the plane. After landing, he used the 5th life's Taesang's memory to drive a car to chase the plane about to explode. Then when Tae-woo landed smoothly, he also arrived in time and crashed into him. Then, using the 7th life's Jeon-yu's memory to walk to Tae-woo's side, he planned to avenge Jisoo personally. As he fiercely covered Taewoo's nose and mouth, Yee-jae's true face was also revealed. Of course, all this still looked like Ji-young to outsiders. As Taewoo was about to suffocate and die, death suddenly descended from the sky. She would absolutely not allow Yee-jae to kill actively. Once so, Yee-jae's 12 possessed rebirths would end prematurely, and he would be sent directly to hell. Just as Yee-jae was overwhelmed by angry emotions, the fountain pen left by Jisoo suddenly awakened him. Jisoo, who became a writer, once said she wanted to write a perfect ending for her novel. It was precisely remembering this sentence that Yee-jae put down his killing intent. And death also suddenly disappeared. Anyway, Taewoo had to be judged by the law, so Yee-jae decided to leave here. Unexpectedly, just as he turned around, Taewoo behind him suddenly stood up. This arrogant chaebol heir had both legs completely broken and was left disabled. For the rest of his life, he would not only pay for the sins he had committed, but also endure endless pain and torment. And Yee-jae, who had avenged his deep hatred, looked at his girlfriend Jisoo's portrait and ashes, shedding tears of grief again. But so what if his great revenge was avenged? So what if he possessed and was reborn? He could never see that Jisoo he longed for again. He didn't know how far he could go on the road ahead because life and death had no meaning for him now. Since that was the case, he might as well use this body to do something he thought was worthwhile. So for a period afterward, Yee-jae and Ji-hoon made meritorious achievements frantically together. Whether you were a gang boss, a local tyrant, or a king of heaven, they just fought. However, the fate planned by death was just not as he wished. When the two tracked a drug dealer to cover Ji-hoon, Yee-jae could only use his body to block the criminal's bullet and fell down the building together with him. With the end of the 9th possessed rebirth, Yee-jae no longer had the belief to live on. Anyway, it was death either way. Better let him die faster. So when death opened the 10th possessed rebirth for him, the homeless man Yee-jae possessed died directly in the stairwell. With the end of the 10th rebirth, the waking Yee-jae quickly started the 11th beginning. This time he possessed an office worker. As the memory crystal flooded into his mind, his sad life also emerged. This was an incredibly ordinary man. He worked conscientiously all his life, dedicating his youth to the company, but unexpectedly was fired by the company in middle age. Even the family he regarded as everything abandoned him fiercely because of his uselessness. At this moment, he lost the whole world. After seeing this man's experiences, Yee-jae thought of himself back then. Didn't he also choose to jump off a building because he had lost everything? Since that was the case, let's do it again. As he rushed quickly towards the road, a scene he never expected happened. When he reacted, he actually saw his former self. It turned out this time he traveled to the timeline where he went to the Taikang group interview. Before dying, he wanted to urge his former self about some things, but in the end, he still died there. Waking up from the edge of hell, he was mocked by death again. No matter what death said, Yee-jae decided to choose to end himself after the 12th rebirth arrived. He really couldn't find the meaning of living. Hearing this, death suddenly revealed a contemptuous expression, then sent Yee-jae with a shot to start the fate of the last possessed rebirth. This time when Yee-jae woke up, he appeared in an ordinary room. But how did this place look so familiar? When looking into the mirror, he was shocked to see that what came into view was actually his own mother. When the memory crystal appeared, Yee-jae instinctively wanted to avoid it, but eventually failed to dodge. As his mother's memory unfolded, Yee-jae saw her unknown side. It turned out that his mother, when young, was also a girl with many dreams. Until she became a wife and a mother, she gave up her dreams and began to teach her husband and children at home. She thought the future life would also be spent slowly in the laughter of a family of 3, but unexpectedly, an accident took away her husband's life. In the most painful days, she learned to be strong and forbearing because there was still a young son who needed her to shelter him from the wind and rain. For her son Yee-jae, she worked day and night, but in the end, she still couldn't escape the fate of being laid off. In the following days, she worked as a garment worker, a waiter, and a cleaner. Under her bitter struggle, Yee-jae finally grew up. But just at the moment her son graduated from college, she suddenly received bad news from him. Her son jumped off a building for some reason. At that moment, the mother only felt the sky spinning and the earth turning dark. The moment she saw her son's body, the mother who hadn't shed tears for many years cried so sadly. Why did she live so hard? Yet God still wanted to take away her only beloved son. In the days after Yee-jae died, the mother's life began to gradually become dim. Because she lost the hope to live, she washed her face with tears all day. Waking up from memory, Yee-jae collapsed completely. Perhaps the pain his mother endured was 100 times more than what he experienced. It turned out his actions were so cruel. Every time his possessed rebirth meant the possessed person was about to reach the end of life, Yee-jae would absolutely not allow his mother to die with hatred like this. Since his mother had never properly loved herself, then in this life, let him and his mother live a good life together. Thinking of this, Yee-jae decided to walk the path his mother had walked. Accompanied by memory, he took a car to near his own columbarium. This was the place his mother must come to every day. Perhaps only here could she speak her heart to her son. Recalling his mother's words, Yee-jae could no longer suppress his crying. He wanted to apologize to his mother, wanted to be his mother's son again in the next life. But any of his words, any intentions, could no longer reach his mother's ears. If death was really coming eventually, then the only thing he could do now was to help his mother make up for those regrets she failed to do over the years. He remembered his mother liked hiking with his father and him the most, so Yee-jae used the remaining time to take his mother to climb high mountains to see the most beautiful sunset. On the way back, because the body was overwhelmed, Yee-jae accidentally slipped down the hillside. This accident broke his leg. In this wilderness, if no one found him, he might die again. For his mother, he didn't give up the hope of survival, so he climbed towards the hillside bit by bit. Not knowing how long passed, he finally climbed up. When he woke up again, he had arrived at the hospital. He survived successfully. The 12th reincarnation completely transformed Yee-jae. He learned to face everything with resilience, ultimately living out a peaceful life in his mother's body. Perhaps from this moment, he finally understood that even if losing everything, life was not without any meaning. Waking up from the edge of death this time, after decades of life, Yee-jae finally understood what the meaning of death punishing him was. Although there was no chance of rebirth, he still kneeled in front of death, begging death to give him another chance, a chance to use his own body to embrace his mother. Death stated that the rules could not be changed from beginning to end, but Yee-jae actually survived the last time and spent a lifetime, which meant he won, so still according to the rules, the punishment ended and he could choose his own destiny. Saying that, Death loaded a blue bullet into the gun and handed it to Yee-jae. Yee-jae slowly aimed the gun at his temple, then pulled the trigger without hesitation. After the gunshot, he found he actually returned to the moment before jumping off the building. Looking at his mother's incoming call, this time he chose to pick up the phone.